You won't like me saying this, but I think Mark Ravenhill is a bit of a national treasure. What I admire so much about him, I think, is that he became extremely famous. I mean, extremely famous and successful, internationally so, with his very first play, Shopping and Fucking, 1996, or his very first full-length play, and he refused to repeat himself. That first play was a kind of contemporary, fast-moving, polysexual, ironic, urban play. And then his next two plays were a response to the importance of being earnest, and then a kind of meditation on the work of Jean Baudrillard, kind of. And he's continued to keep moving, to challenge his own talent, to take new positions on the chessboard. And he keeps moving. He's written a musical. The most recent thing he's written, a pantomime. He's written adaptations, an opera, an oratorio, plays for young people. He's done versions of Brecht. He's adapted or rewritten Voltaire. He's written a piece of Grand Guignol horror. One Edinburgh Festival, he wrote 16 20-minute plays to be enjoyed every morning with your breakfast at the Traverse. He's written for dancers. He's written for Betty Bourne and for Mark Almond. He's written for students. Actually, two of his least known plays were written for students. For Lambda in 2004, he wrote North Greenwich, which is a brilliant verbatim piece about the Millennium Dome fiasco. And then much more recently, in about 2015, I think it was, for Drama Centre students, he wrote When the Terror Has Ended, the Victims Will Dance, which is about the kind of the grimly gallows humor kind of dance events, the balls held by doomed aristocrats in the aftermath of the French Revolution. And it was seemed to just be written for students, which is another sign, I think, of the incredible generosity and daring that Mark has shown consistently over nearly a quarter of a century. Equally admirable to me is that Mark seems to me a writer who is very much at ease with himself. You could see the description I've just given you of a writer restlessly reinventing their style, never content to rest in a particular form, as a sign of some deeply prickly anxiety about themselves. You might also wonder how we can detect what self they have to be at ease with, since they write so much and so differently. But what Mark's work always shows, I think, is a confidence and clarity of purpose. There's not that much, I think, that stylistically connects them. And there's a certain kind of classical pared back grace that I find in a lot of his plays. Obviously, there are some thematic continuities and preoccupations in them, but over and above that, I think all the plays know what they're doing. And that might seem like an obvious thing to say, but it's actually rarer than you might think. A lot of plays, even by quite well-established writers, they kind of sprawl. They show a bit of a mission creep. But what Mark's writing, and I think his rewriting, does is to pare the plays down to their essences and to try to bring them out as sharply as possible, so that, you know, like them or hate them, and God, some of the critics hate them. I mean, Charles Spencer seemed to have been personally offended by almost everything Mark wrote. The plays are unmistakably themselves, and they seem to be kind of wonderfully unavoidable in a certain way. And they're also, having said that, sometimes deceptive, or at least I think the gesture of them sometimes misleads or has misled some commentators. Shopping and Fucking, his first and probably still most famous play, was kind of seen at the time as a sort of generational fuck you, you know, almost a statement of intent of a bored kind of post-Thatcherite, post-queer, me generation turning their back on politics. And I kind of think it wasn't. I mean, I don't think it was turning its back on politics, but it may have been turning its back on a certain kind of political play. the kind of play that had just been epitomized, I suppose, by the David Hare trilogy at the National. And it's a subtly moral play about the limited worldview of its characters, and it operated through a set of structural echoes and ironies that offered a broader vision and a longer cultural memory than anything possessed by any of the characters. It wasn't a manifesto. It was a kind of set of provocations in a way. And I find this also very enthralling about Mark's work. He's a playwright, I think, who uses the machine of a play to ask questions, to investigate. I genuinely think that Mark's plays know things that Mark doesn't know. His recent play, The Cane, focused on a teacher who's been sunk in controversy when it's been revealed. Basically, he's kind of on the point of retirement, I think, and it's just been revealed that he administered completely legally the cane at his school, and the ethics of this, the meaning of the outrage, the role that the secret plays at work and in the family, the talismanic significance of the object itself, are all kind of subjected to this ferocious and very funny and very complicated scrutiny without ever insisting on answers, without ever pushing those answers on us. The questions, I think, feel like they kind of live and breathe in the fabric of the play itself. And I think of The Cane, though I'm not completely sure why, it's a kind of companion piece to The Cut, which is his play from 2006. I mean, maybe it's the titles, The Cut and The Cane. The fact they both focus on a kind of faintly sexualized act of violence, and it's also, it looks at the way that these acts of state-sanctioned cruelty thread through families. But in The Cut, but by never quite explaining what the cut is, it acquires a mystery that draws you in, but also a kind of intellectual edge that asks us questions about personal morality, about the rights of the state, about the lies we tell ourselves, about the dilemmas of revolution, and kind of much more. But it does those absolutely, all those questions are just simply embodied in what happens in the experience of seeing them, rather than delivered as a sort of conclusion to an argument. Even more complicated, I think, was his play Over There from 2009, which was a brilliant political play, which kind of took as its premise two twin brothers living on either side of the Berlin Wall, obviously during the Cold War, end of the Cold War period. And those twins were played by the real twins, Luke and Harry Treadaway. And the two characters have to adjust to no longer being cut off from one another after the wall is torn down in 89, and their identities start to slip and blur into each other. And Mark co-directed the play with Ramin Gray, and the production was quite brilliant, genuinely kind of European in its design. It was one of the real forerunners of trying to really bring that European sensibility into British theatre. And Mark's script is kind of completely wonderful. It's extremely complicated. It's quite a hard play to read, actually. But it kind of mimicked the blurring of identities, or it doesn't mimic them. It kind of initiates the blurring of identities with lines of dialogue that seemed to kind of pass chaotically between the brothers, and it felt like it was asking huge questions about the meaning of the West and the legacy of the Soviet bloc, and the way that geopolitical systems and structures run right through our most intimate selves. Anyway, I could go on, but I won't. Mark Ravenhill is, I think, without a doubt, one of our most serious and challenging and wonderful playwrights, and I am delighted to have a chance to talk to him.
There we go.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, Mark. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, I'm very well.
The moustache. How long have you had the moustache?
Well, there was a moustache. Got a bit bushy now.
It's good. I like it.
Quite hard to trim, yeah.
Mm. How is lockdown for you?
Well, For me as a writer, it's very good. Um, it's perfect working conditions.
Right.
So I'm doing masters of writing. Yeah,
Oh
you know,
wow.
obviously lockdown in terms of what's on the news and generally is pretty horrific. But yeah, it's very good for writing.
Is this kind of new stuff that you're coming up with, or is it you had a set of things under
It's all
commission?
sorts of things, really. It was yeah, revising some stuff that was almost ready, and going back and finding some stuff that I, I should have revisited and I didn't, and starting new things and reading ahead for stuff that I might write in a few months' time, because I anticipate being inside until the end of the year, really.
Huh.
So yeah, so it's been yeah, it's good. Yeah, I just write all day long.
Great. And are you finding are you setting yourself a new kind of discipline or timetable, or are you just writing as and when you feel like it?
Yeah, I don't have a particular timetable. So I suppose as and when I feel like it, but I sort of feel like it most of the day.
Right.
So
Okay.
it was quite good.
And was
Yeah,
that immediate? Was that as soon as the lockdown happened that you kind of clicked into that?
yeah, yeah,
Oh,
it was really. Yeah.
cool. What I want to do is start with some slightly general questions about how you write, which I'm very aware that your plays are all so different. There may be no general answers to these
Sure,
questions,
sure.
but I was just thinking about where your plays start. What uh, would there be a typical sort of thing uh, that when it comes to you, you think, oh, I think there's a play in this? Like, would it typically be an image, or a character, or an issue, or are they
Um,
different?
yeah, I mean, I think it probably does differ, but yeah, I think on the whole, it does start with something that is probably more like an image or a moment, just a little, quite a small thing that unlocks something that puzzles you or troubles you or raises a question for
Mhm.
you. I mean, I think even if you start from the other, or certainly for me, if you start from the other end with a big thing, or you do a lot of research on something, that's still not really the thing that starts the actual writing. It's
Right.
often within the research, just finding one little moment that is then the key that unlocks the door that can get you to start to draw on whatever research or thinking that you've got. And until I've got that little thing,
Yeah.
uh, the rest doesn't happen.
And what is it? What is it about that thing that sort of turns, let's say, an amorphous set of concerns or anxieties or questions into something that feels like it's got a kind of theatrical, dramatic shape?
Yeah, I suppose I just feel that there's enough of a puzzle or a contradiction or something in there that I sense that it's got enough fuel in it to investigate over the course of a play.
Right.
And normally, once I've got that sense strong enough, that does drive me to write a play. I mean, sometimes you realise that it wasn't right and there isn't that amount of fuel in it. But on the whole, once I've got that sort of urge from something strong enough, it tends to be right. That is the way into
Hmm.
starting the process of writing a play.
And because you said that sometimes that moment will come out of research. So obviously there might sometimes have been a process going on already. What's the process between kind of going, yeah, I've got this, I've got the idea for the play, and actually sitting down and writing dialogue?
I think once I've got that sense that there's something to go, then I will start writing. I will start investigating. Yeah, I mean that almost becomes an itch that you have to scratch.
Right.
So once that's there, uh, yeah, it would be almost impossible to walk away from it. So I can walk away from it for years on end, possibly, if I haven't got that. But once I've got that, I'll start to write, yeah, dialogue. Essentially, I'll start to write dramatic action,
Mm.
um, and you know, often none of that initial writing may end up in the play at all. But at least it sort of pushed me into the zone of writing dramatic action.
Mm. And you said the phrase you used was you felt you were ready to investigate it through writing. So this is a kind of a different sort of thing from, let's say, writing the play. This is a sort of exploratory. What are you investigating as you do that?
I mean, I think I am finding out that there's a story and what the story is, and that there are characters, and what the implication of the characters for that, what the implication of that story is for the characters and their participation in creating that story. But I suppose also there's a sense of exploring a problem, an emotional, ethical, moral, political dilemma. And I don't think about that too heavily, but yeah, I think as fuel for a piece of theatre, yeah, ultimately you're picking at some sort of problem in that way.
And does that mean that when you're doing these kind of writing tasks, how far is it complete instinctive improvisation on paper, in the sense you kind of go, well, I know part of the idea is that there are, I'm making something up,
Yeah,
two men are fighting in the back of a pub, so I
yeah.
need there's going to be a scene where they negotiate how that's going to happen, you know, and you go, that's all I need to know, and I will start writing out and see what happens? Or is there a bit more structure and shape to what you're doing?
No, I think initially it's improvising on the page. So that's really sort of how I initially sort of trained myself as a writer, was working on improvisation skills. So particularly from Keith Johnston and from his books Impro and Impro for Storytellers. Though there's a whole treasure trove there of different improvisation exercises, which I found with very little conversion could be turned into writing exercises. So that is all essentially about not allowing your conscious mind to interfere too much. I mean, there's always a little bit of a hand on the tiller, sort of steering things. Think I'm going a complete blind alley now. I'll steer my improvisation towards something a bit more fruitful. So I think it's probably a bit like what goes on in an actor's brain when they're performing. They're both, in some ways, totally believing and embodying and existing as that person. But of course, there's also another bit of the brain saying, go a little bit faster, go a little bit slower. You've got to get over there because you've got that, pick that prop up there.
Yeah,
So,
right.
so I don't think, yeah, I think the conscious brain is there with a little bit of a hand steering, but I allow as much as possible the situation and the characters to write themselves at that stage, and to surprise me. I think it's the things that surprise you that are certainly one of the most enjoyable things that you've decided, although you told yourself you weren't going to, of course you do decide, I want the scene to be about this, I want them to do that, and then you find there's something else, and sometimes that's a complete blind alley, but probably more times it's better than what you told yourself you must write about or would write about.
And how, and there would be presumably quite major discoveries would happen in there, so that things that people who know your plays would go, you know, the main event that happens in this play, might that be the sort of thing you would actually discover through that sort of improvisation?
Yeah, almost entirely. Yeah, I don't think I've ever been able to, in the initial draft, tell pretty much anything about where it's heading. And often if I've decided that I want to get to somewhere, that I think that nearly always turns out to be a bit of a block to the thing that I'm going to force these characters in the second act to get to this point where then that's I find that tends to be not helpful for that stage of the writing. I've got to let it find itself where it's going, and that's often, well, I'd say always better than what I could have planned in advance. So I'm very, very my brain isn't, or I haven't trained my brain to be a planner and an outliner. So I think if I'd had my time again, I might have trained that bit a bit better, because you certainly be better for working in film and television and stuff, where it's almost impossible not to get a commission, almost entirely impossible to get a commission without laying out what you're going to write before you've written it. But anyway, that's what I found worked for me, and that's the way I've trained myself. And I'm fortunate that there's quite a few theatres that I found that will trust me to do that.
And you said first draft in there, and what's the relationship between the exploratory investigating writing and the first draft? Or is it the first draft actually comes out of all of that exploratory writing, or is there a point at which you've done your investigation, you go, now I feel confident about powering ahead with a kind of first draft?
Yeah, I mean, I think quite often there will be a few false starts where I don't get all the way through a full-length play. I mean, that's quite a sustained sort of athletic marathon running thing, writing a full-length play. So I think quite often there'll be a few things where, start off and you feel as though you've got that energy and that sort of fuel to sustain something full-length, but then you realize that you've sort of fizzled out after 20 pages or something. But so I'll often have a few goes at that. It often feels like you're starting from scratch all over again. You think, did I write plays before?
Yeah, right.
It's each time it's like building up that muscle again in yourself and in the piece to be able to sustain it for longer. So so there's normally a few full starts before I can even have the energy and momentum to write something full length, and that will be a first draft, of which maybe very little will survive into anything that the audience would see.
And presumably, in a sense, that exploratory writing is partly, as you say, about finding the story, but it's also about building up that muscle, sort of gearing yourself up.
Yeah, it's sort of athletic, really.
Right.
It's like when I did my marathon training, it's just, or couch to 5K. It's just that gradual sort of building up the muscle.
You've talked kind of about the way that you're finding the kind of story and how the characters are getting through this idea. What about things like sort of form and style for the play? How do they emerge? I mean, do they also emerge organically, or are the decisions made there?
I don't know really. Yeah, I suppose I do think about form and style. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I'll read other plays or even other novels or watch films or something that I think might give me some clues as to what form a piece might take. Mm-hmm. But sometimes you can head off on the wrong path with the form, and you can look at the material that you've got and think, I'm squeezing this into the wrong form, and so sometimes I think probably the best way around is you've maybe got some sort of sniff of what form it might take, but then the material will tell you that it needs a different form. I think.
And you said you're not a planner. Does that, because you've done some exploratory stuff, so presumably that means you have some sense of where you're going, but obviously you are, and we're going to talk very specifically about a play later where there are big things you haven't decided, very, very consciously and deliberately. But
God, haven't I?
but are
Well,
you sort of so does that mean that when you actually kind of to use the athletic metaphor, you're at the kind of you're on the starting line? What do you know about the play and what don't you know?
which stage do you mean? Like writing at the very beginning?
Yeah, I suppose writing a sort of first draft rather than after you've done the
Um,
exploratory.
um, I don't think I know very much at all, really. I mean, uh, I don't know which characters will survive into subsequent drafts.
Mhm.
There's a bit of a balloon debate going on all the way through the play as to who's earning their place in the play. So you have to lay off some people normally after a draft or some draft. I don't think I've ever added a character. I don't think I've ever found that the play needs another character. I think it tends to be at the end of drafts taking one or two characters aside and saying, "I'm really sorry, I've made a bit of a mistake, and I'm sending you home." Yeah, I don't think I know very much at all, really. We start off in one place, but then we might go to other places. I don't think I know that it's going to be. Um, I think I think I think when you start something, Keith Johnston talks about a circle of expectation that you quite quickly establish um, the sort of parameters of a piece that it raises expectations about what it might explore and where it might head, and sort of what sort of style or form or genre it, it might be in. So it starts to tell you what it and you and an audience might expect, and then how much you want to satisfy those expectations or how much you want to undermine those expectations is up to you. But almost inevitably within 5 minutes of a drama, we will, all of us, project expectations onto that of what we hope and fear might happen. So it's a case of playing initially with yourself and eventually with an audience about what you do with those hopes and fears that those first sort of 5 minutes raise as expectations, and then working within that circle of expectation, or if you really decide to completely confound that circle of expectation.
Right. And these images like athleticism, marathon running, and improvisation suggest to me, but tell me if I'm wrong, that means that the first draft process will actually be a fairly short, intense burst. It's not about writing a little bit over 6 months.
Yeah, although I think that's slowed down a bit. I think partly just being younger. Yeah, I think like 15 years ago, I could have written that first draft over a long weekend, just really
Right.
done it, you know. And some people did that. Lots of playwrights have done that a lot. I mean, reading about Noel Coward and
Yeah.
going upstairs and coming back, you know, 3 days later with Blithe Spirit or something. But I guess he was still fairly young when he did that stuff. I mean, I found just as I got older, I think you just slow down a bit. So yeah, but yeah, probably over a few weeks or something, I could write that sort of first draft, because I'm not going back and revising uh,
Right.
or changing. I'm just at that stage a very low ambition, which is just to fill up sides of paper and
Right.
see what I've got.
Huh. And then redrafting and rewriting, is that any more planned, or is it more you kind of thought, I did that, I think that's quite good, that's not very interesting, that's a clue to the future, and then you just completely improvise a second draft? Or are you actually rewriting the first?
No, I think often with the second draft, I will just not look at the first. I mean, I will have looked at it, but I won't look at it while I'm writing the second draft. I figure if anything's really good, it will have stuck.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I will think a lot about that first draft, and sometimes I'll even quite methodically go through it and break it down into units and sort of analyze it as you might analyze a play when you start a rehearsals,
Yeah.
or something like that. Or sometimes, but certainly, yeah, once you've written that first draft, it's sort of on your mind all day long, and as you're going about your business, you think, oh no, but if that was earlier, then that would be much better, because then that would allow you to, oh yeah, and then I really don't need that. I mean, it sort of goes on. I suspect probably even when you're asleep as well, that sort of going on. So when I come to write a second draft, yeah, I've got all that, and then I'm generalizing here because each play is different, but I would say on the whole, the second draft, I try not to turn it into a rewrite of the first draft, but as another go through from knowing what I've learned from the first draft. And it's only in later drafts that they become more revising and rewriting and quite substantial cut and pasting and stuff of previous drafts. But I think wouldn't start that until like a third draft, really.
Right.
Actually referring back to the material that I'd already written.
And what sort of, again, I'm sure this is different each time, but what sort of gap is there time-wise between drafts?
I think ideally it would be a few weeks. I think that few weeks of thinking about it, and that is really fascinating. I mean, that is you're just sort of fascinated by that all day long, and in some ways it's like solving a Rubik's cube sort of thing, looking back and thinking, no, just move that. It's a lot of it is a sort of puzzle solving exercise. In some ways, quite literally, like doing a crossword or something like that, and hopefully that then connects to the wider puzzle solving of moral, ethical, emotional, political puzzle solving, or at least I mean, no play ever solves the puzzle, but
no. And that's interesting, because you said earlier that obviously that some ethical, political, whatever it is, set of questions or dilemmas is sort of embedded in that original idea that makes you think, yeah, there's a play in this. But you also said you don't really think about that very consciously as you're writing. Is that because basically you can kind of trust that if it's baked into the idea, working on play out?
Yeah, it should be embodied in the idea, and the actual choices and actions that happen in the play should embody that idea. I think it should be embodied. So if I think about something in too much of a sort of essayistic or sort of opinion piece way, then you start to find that the characters start to say sentences from your essay or think piece. So then I also have to go back and cut those anyway, because that's just sort of using a drama as a way to scattergun it with various things that you should have put in a comment piece.
And so would it be true to say then that you would, is it you're deliberately trying to sort of not mask your opinion, but to...
I don't have many opinions.
Yeah.
I've normally got an opinion about the last that's the same as the last thing that I've read, so I'm very easily swayed. Apart from quite far right things, and even some quite fogyish pieces in the Spectator, which I just can't engage with. But I can shift from whatever piece I've read, from sort of One Nation Tory to Stalinist, is my sort of spectrum of opinions and beliefs. So I'm very swayable.
Right.
But I think that's maybe quite good for writing a dramatic, something that's hopefully dialectical. Is that I'm quite swayed. I'm rooting for each of the characters as they make their choices and commit to action.
Yes. And to some extent, would it be true to say that actually writing the play is partly about trying to find out what you might think about a subject.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's true. I think yeah, or to go deep, or to go deeper into feeling more genuinely perplexed about the subject. That it's yeah, deeper into the dialectic, I think.
And when you're writing dialogue, in your head, are you thinking of, as it were, real people in a real place, or are you thinking of actors saying these lines on a stage?
I don't think it's real people in a real place. I think it's I I think it's dramatic action. So it's actually more their sort of essential will that I'm sort of embodying. So that's ultimately something that's hopefully going to impel actors into in dramatic action. But it doesn't really matter very much what they look like, and I'm not really trying to convince anybody that you could overhear this on a bus.
Right.
But it's words that are impelled by a strong will, a strong sort of need, a strong sort of dramatic action. So and I so it's that I'm trying to embody, and I normally have a feel of something quite sort of kinetic, that people are moving closer together or pushing each other away. There's a little sort of spatial dance that I can feel going on. So it's more just this sense of wanting and a sort of kinetic sense, which I think those ultimately are useful for actors and a director. But it's the sort of essential, to me at least, the essentials of theatre,
Right.
that I'm writing, rather than, okay, I'm sitting in row C and it looks like this.
Yeah.
It's not that, and it's not, okay, if somebody heard this on the bus, they would think this was real people speaking.
And very nuts and bolts questions. Do you are you typing when you draft, or handwriting?
No, I've no, all my adult life really. What there's been computers of some kind, so I've really got used to using a keyboard. So yeah, I haven't written anything by hand since university essays, and now I can't even write a postcard. I mean, just the pain in your hand of holding a pen, even just to write, "Hi, I'm having a great time." I've lost all ability to use a pen or a pencil.
And really nerdy now. Font. What font do you go for?
I've got Times New Roman size 12, or whatever you would call that. Yeah, on my Apple Mac. Yeah,
That's very.
I sort of feel.
Times New Roman is turning out to be the runaway hit of playwrights on these internet.
Oh really? I read once a few years ago that it was terribly naff to use Times New Roman. I thought, oh my god, I need to find a more fashionable font. But that just somehow just sort of sits with me. I feel easiest and most comfortable looking at that and reading that. Just sort of, I don't know why, it just sits with me well.
And writer's block. Have you ever had it?
Not really.
Right.
No. Of course, you have some days when you thought you got something great to write, and you find actually you've got more or less nothing. But nothing for a sustained period. I mean, I suppose it depends what you define as writer's block. But it seems to me that it's that point where actually you have, it's a substantial break in your writing that may, for months or maybe years, you've lost context, or you can't reconnect with that bit of you that writes. And no, I haven't ever had that. I think because I just think, just write something. I just like lower your standards, and then lower some more and more and more until you've got something on the page, because something can always be made better. So I've always just after a few days, just gone, just write something and just don't, just don't criticize it. Just allow. Yeah, I just think a lot of bad writing, which hopefully nobody else will ever see, is better than the more the blank page goes on and on. And I think the more fearful. I mean, you're scared every day. Every day, the sight of a blank page is scary, but it's just starting to cover it with anything makes it less scary for me.
Can I ask you about notes and taking notes from directors or even actors or artistic directors, literary managers, that sort of thing? Because I think certainly younger writers can often find that a really difficult process because it's quite intimidating. And if you get a note that you don't completely agree with or understand, do you have to take it? And so, do you have any wisdom about a good way of responding to that?
Well, my only wisdom would just be to listen. I don't argue and come back at somebody who's just giving me notes. I just listen and write down what they say, and then later think about it. And there'll normally be a couple of really useful things in there, and then a lot of it unuseful, or sometimes just plain muddle-headed and wrong. But yeah, in a note session, I sort of think, well, let them get it all out, and then if anything's good, a good nudge towards something, or even just a very practical suggestion of a cut or something. If it's good, then use it.
And you've have your ways of the process that you've described, has that changed over time?
I think it keeps on evolving, but I don't think it's so drastically different to where I started from. I mean, I think I've got better at taking myself from draft to draft to draft. So I think earlier on, you sort of feel, and maybe it's expected of you, that you show theatre's drafts, and that you're given notes on drafts, and it's not really, as you know, that's not really necessary to show everybody else your mess and your it's your working out, really. You know, it's showing people you're working out. And of course, people are on the whole terribly nice, so they get this huge mess of a thing and all pile in with being lovely and making a cup of tea and saying, no, they really loved it, just got some thoughts and stuff. But actually, they're responding to something which they don't need to read because it's just a big old mess. So I think I've got more confident at saying, actually, I'll show it to you a lot later. I will get as far as I can with working it and reworking it, and only when I feel that I've solved whatever I can solve will I show it to somebody else.
How many? Again, this may not generalize, but how many drafts might you typically do? What about to take a fairly recent play, The Cane? Do you remember how many drafts you did of that?
I think it's probably about seven drafts,
right.
And they're quite substantial. And so I don't call a rewrite a draft. I think some people, falsely claim that a draft is something where they've changed 10 lines, or even if they're 10 quite crucial lines. I mean, a draft is like you pull it apart and investigate each bit of the thing and put it back together again, often with new parts, and then rearrange parts. And so a draft to me is something quite substantial, and it's different from a revision or a line, a little bit of cutting or a little bit of line rewriting. So I would say about 7 substantial drafts of The Cane.
Right. And what point, I mean, is it draft 7 would be the first time you show someone, or?
Yeah, so at that stage, I gave it to the Royal Court, and Vicky read it, and she had a couple of very good questions about it, particularly the end. So I went away and did not really another draft, but I had worked on it for like a year and a half by then. So it was very substantially sort of. I sort of felt like I'd inhabited everything and sort of thought about everything and learned it. But she did ask a couple of key questions, which led me to rewrite maybe a few pages of the play in quite a in a substantial way rather than just a line thing. So yeah, but so they were very good questions that she asked.
And so I asked whether how your working process had changed. I mean, going right back to what I think is your first full length play, Shopping and Fucking, was that written? How was that written? If you
So that
remember.
was so the first draft was written very, very quickly, over I think probably a couple of weeks, and I actually I wrote that for some friends to do as a play reading on a Monday night at the Finborough Theatre in Old Thought. So we did a Monday night play reading, and then from that I took out some characters, did quite a substantial sort of rewrite of that, and then once I'd done that second draft, I sort of thought, actually, this is good. There's something here, I think this is of a quality where I should send this to some people, because I hadn't really started with that. I just started with, in the first place, just put something together quite quickly for a Monday night play reading, because I hadn't written anything other than very short stuff before, and I hadn't really thought that it would be anything other than just an exercise and then move on. But I thought, actually, this is better than I thought I was capable of. So I decided to send it to some people, and one of the first people I sent it to was Out of Joint and to Max Stafford Clark. And then so that was much more. It's partly that I was a younger writer, and I think younger writers often are work is seen at earlier drafts, maybe not necessarily for the best, but often is seen at earlier drafts. So then there were workshops and notes and stuff from Max. So I would say it's probably still went through the same process of about 7 or 8 quite substantial drafts.
Right.
But I was sort of joined by Max for the whole time, and sometimes by some actors a couple of times for readings and a workshop and stuff as I went through those drafts. So a little bit more, a little bit more guided, and sometimes that was useful, but sometimes also sometimes it was unuseful, because then you've got a whole group of people's opinions and sometimes you feel a bit honor bound to do stuff that came out of that, but then you do it, and then you look at it and you say, in all honesty, this is a dilution or a weakening of what I want to do with the space. So then you have to take it all out again. So sometimes you sort of go around a bit in circles with that. I mean, there were some very key, very, very good, very useful things that came out of that. But I would say it was sort of 50-50, really key, useful things. But 50% things that sent me off into slightly cul-de-sacs, really. But I think once because that was the very first thing that I'd done, then I sort of started to assume that would be the way that things would be, that you'd have to go through this excruciating process of showing people early drafts and allowing them to see your mess and try and help you out. So gradually, or maybe not necessarily gradually, but I made a conscious decision after the first few plays that I didn't want to put any of us through that again. So really the Cut, which was a play that I wrote, I think I wrote it a couple of years before. I think it was produced in 2005, and I think I wrote it in about 2003. So I'd had about 3 or 4 plays on over 6 or 7 years that had pretty much gone through the process of lots of people seeing my workings out. Right. And I thought, okay, I want to change this now. I don't want to put people through that. So the Cut was the first play that was I finished. It was a finished play before I showed it to anybody.
I want to talk about the cut in a moment. Just before we get to that, of course, you've written in such different forms, and I'm thinking of the fact that you've recently written a musical with David Williams, and you've written pantomime, and you've written oratorios, and very short plays, and historical epics, and things like that. In what way does do those kind of generic things affect the way you write? I mean, a panto, for example, the circle of expectation is, I don't know, is something you...
Yeah, you could have subverted it for a panto, but I decided that, I mean, I really wanted to write within like the I mean, there isn't really traditional pantomime because it gets reinvented all the time. But as much as possible within, a conventional pantomime thing. I think I definitely know a lot of things about brevity and clarity with writing the pantomime, because it's got to move. It's there's story plus gags essentially with pantomime. So you've got to hit all the key plot points very, very quickly and very, very cleanly, and declare the plot, and then have jokes often that don't serve the story, but you've got to keep that story like motoring along, and then and there's sort of another layer of the score really that's playing a sort of different line, which is jokes, and there were songs in that as well, so you've got to get to the songs and stuff. So I think brevity and clarity and storytelling were really good things that I learned from doing the pantomime, and I think some of those I think quite a lot of those skills were needed for writing the musical,
right?
As well, for writing Boy in the Dress. Yeah. I mean, but that is such a totally different thing in a way that I don't think it probably uses. I think it uses a very different bit of my head than the bit that writes a play like The Cane. So the story's there. It's David's story. It's an absolute contemporary children's classic. So the audience are coming for that story. The star of the musical then is the story and the songs, and you go to a musical for the songs, so you're using somebody else's story and preparing the way in each scene for these songs. So it's a very sort of selfless thing, and it's and you need quite a lot of technical ability, but and I think it's such a long process that you do have to love the story, but it's not your story. So so some of the dialogue was from the book, and then when the bits where I'd sort of I tried to do sort of invisible mending, so it wasn't like my take on David's book, it was David's book. So the extra dialogue and stuff that I did write, I wanted them to sound like they belonged with David's dialogue. So you're taking yourself out of the equation in lots of ways. So so I think that almost has no crossover with writing an original play for the Royal Court. Right. It's sort of it's sort of like a different discipline. Right. It's maybe like, if you could do, maybe you're a sports person, but it's two different sports really. I guess you need, some things you'd have in common. You'd be basically very fit and very disciplined and stuff to be a sports person, but then but two totally different areas of sport.
And so the cut, so this is the first play that you kind of originated and then sort of completed to your own satisfaction, kind of in your head or on your computer on your own?
On the page.
On the page. So what was that starting point? What was the thing that made you think?
Literally just the words, the cut.
Right.
As in the street name in London. I just thought it's quite an odd thing in a way, or just, the way that we sort of, you just get used to the thing. Meet me at the cut, see you at the cut, the cut. But actually it's one of those things, if you just step back and go, the cut, we're doing things at the cut, that's quite a brutal thing. So yeah, so that just got me thinking about okay, what's a world where the cut actually means something, and is something. So yeah, so I just started writing. I think again, that's all I knew, that there was going to be a world where the cut didn't mean what the cut meant to us, and I just started writing the first draft. Literally just went, okay, right, you're going to play now. It's called The Cut. Write it.
Right. And it started, am I right in thinking it started as a short play for Payne's Plough?
I wrote the long scene, and we did it as a lunchtime play reading. Yeah, yeah. So other people writing things with other London street names or London names. Yeah. So there was in the Young Vic studio. Yes, whenever that would have been, a long time ago, like probably that was 2002 or 2003 or something like that.
Okay.
So yeah, so I'd written the first long scene, and I wasn't sure whether that was a sort of self-contained play, but then actually I felt like there was more to explore in that idea, and realized that I wanted to carry on, that it hadn't completed. So yeah, the first long scene was written I don't know, maybe a year before the rest of it, but it just sort of stayed in my head, and I thought, no, that isn't finished business.
So, I mean, I know this was quite a long time ago now, but can you remember that feeling that this is unfinished business? How does that actually relate to that first scene? What is it that made you feel there was more to that story?
I don't know. I certainly felt I could sort of hear that character's voice, the central character who's the only one who runs through the whole play. I sort of felt his voice, and and the sort of dilemma that he was in, which in a way is quite similar to the dilemma that's in The Cane, of him carrying through this now quite arcane but still very cruel ritual thing, that I hadn't put him under enough pressure to really explore the contradiction in your function being to carry through something which you'd lost belief in, really, but you still felt you had to do. That I wanted that to be pushed more and challenged, and that sort of tested more. I think I felt that it still could be put under more pressure and sort of scrutiny, really, that behavior.
And at what point, because one of the many things I love about The Cut is it seems to me to have an extremely elegantly lucid, clear structure. Those three scenes that set up these three very clear relationships that all work together. At what point did you realize those were the three stories? Were there other stories that occurred to you, or?
No, I don't think I thought about other stories, but I just think I took it a scene at a time. So I had that first scene, and I think he'd probably referenced a wife and a son and stuff. So again, that sort of, in a way, that's part of the circle of expectation thing. But certainly the clues are there in what you've already written. So rather than adding, I wanted to more thoroughly explore what was mentioned in the first scene. So I think the first scene gave me the clues that there was a wife and a son, and they were both very present in his life, and both had very different attitudes to what he was doing with the cut. So I think I knew that I wanted to visit his relationship with his wife, and then his relationship with his son. So I think I probably knew that I needed to write two more scenes.
Right. And do you remember, because obviously the final scene is a real shift, that sense that we're now some time later, the son is part of a group that's overthrown the previous regime. Do you, I mean, it's really hard to remember this stuff, but do you remember the point where you thought, oh yeah, that's how the son will speak? Because actually it's not just another domestic scene.
Yeah, I don't really remember, to be honest.
Right.
No, I think I probably just knew that there would be a last scene with the son, but I think probably when I was writing it with the mother, I thought it might just be the next day he goes to see the son at university, where I think the son says the son's studying at university. I think probably that's. I thought, oh, there'll be a scene with the son, and it'll be the next day. And then as I started it, I'm slightly making this up now, but I think it's probably, I know how my mind tends to work, so I probably started it and thought, oh no, that's not really taking us much further. We're just going to revisit some of the same things. It needs an extra ramp up or an extra sort of twist to push us into a new exploration of the problem. So how about if there'd been a sort of semi-revolution and the things had turned around? Oh, there's a scene in that now. That's proper fuel for a scene, not just sort of treading water with what had happened before.
And am I right in remembering that you wrote the second scene with Deborah Findlay in mind?
I think it was more that as I was writing, and certainly after I'd written it, that Deborah's voice sort of stayed with me. So I don't think it was as conscious as I will now write a scene for Deborah Findlay. But I think as I wrote it, probably even as I was writing it, and certainly by the time I put it aside for a few days, it was like all those rhythms and tone of it. It felt very much like something for Deborah Findlay.
And is that something you do? That you have an actor's voice sometimes in your head?
Well, Dr. Dan. Yes, sometimes actors' voices. Yeah, something I'm writing at the moment. It didn't start like that way, but as I've got further and further into play, I thought, oh, I can really now hear a particular actor's voice, who might never end up playing it, but you know, there's something about the rhythms and the tone, and something about it that I feel would sit well with a particular actor. Who knows? It could be offered to them, and they could disagree entirely. Yeah.
And of course, in the premiere of the cut, Ian McKellen played Paul.
Yeah.
At what point did you know he was going to play the part? And was there any rewrite process where you thought, now I know it's Ian McKellen, I might want to inflect some of the dialogue differently or not?
No, I didn't change anything actually. I think as actors get older, they need to learn the script earlier and earlier and earlier. So actually, one of the things of working with older actors and more experienced actors is actually you can't really do the thing that you could do with like a young company, like the Shopping and Fucking Company, of actually doing substantial rewrites all the way through rehearsals. The script has to be sort of ready to go, because you know, even as you get into your 40s, 50s, every decade, an actor just needs that much longer to learn and prepare. So yeah, so once that script was handed to Ian, he was going to start working on it and learning it. So you had to have something that was pretty much ready to go. So yeah, but I sent the play to Michael Grandage, and he's very good at reading things very quickly. So and just by one of those happy coincidences, Ian McKellen had been in to see him like a couple of days before, saying, I'd like to do something at the Donmar, what should we look at? And I think maybe Michael had got a couple of classics that he wanted to suggest, and he said, well, why aren't we thinking about a new play? So it's just one of those things where Michael thought, oh, and now I've got this play and Ian. And so so it all happened very quickly. So then he said, oh, listen, Ian McKellen wants to do a new play. I've got your play, can I give it to Ian McKellen? Yes. And then within about 2 days, I went into the offices and read the play aloud with Ian. I played the other parts, and Ian played his part. And then he said, I want to do it. Let's go to the Ivy. So then we walked down the streets with people shouting, Gandalf, Gandalf, Gandalf. And so it all happened after the play being quite, you know, private and close and worked on.
Right.
Then it sort of very quickly, over a matter of days, became a public thing.
And the thing I kind of alluded to earlier about things you deliberately decided not to know when writing the play. Of course, here, the cut itself, exactly what it is, seems to be one of the joyful mysteries of it, and one of the productive mysteries, the fact that you don't tell us precisely. But does that mean, do you, and I'm not going to ask what it is, do you actually know in your head what it is, but are choosing not to share
Yeah.
it? Oh, okay.
Well, I think I did know what it was. I think, yeah, I'm not, yeah. It wasn't even that conscious as to keep it mysterious. There just never seemed to be a fruitful and sort of earned way for
Okay.
somebody to sit down in the play and tell somebody else what it was, given that there was such a thing in their world that they all knew what it was.
Right.
That, you know, it's essential to their world as a cup of tea is to us, and you don't sit down and say, "No, I'm going to make you a cup of tea." What tea is? It's grown into, you know. So they just never, there never seemed to be a place that was just sort of logical or believable or whatever for somebody to explain to somebody else what the cut is, because they were sort of, you know, hazed into it being just their normality.
Huh. Last question.
Yeah.
So you've been writing for 25 years or so. What have you learnt? What can you do now that you couldn't do 25 years ago, do you think?
I think I've got. I think I've got. I think I've got more craft, more technical facility. Um, you know, I can just on simple ways and some. You know, I can sustain a scene for longer. I can sustain a scene for the whole act with a real active will, and that just wasn't an option when I wrote Shopping and Fucking, and it's partly in shorter scenes because that is as long as I could sustain a scene for. I think, you know, I think I've learned more just little skills along the way. You know, I've had to write lyrics for things and taught myself to write lyrics, and I think maybe not learnt, but certainly sort of happened is I've found myself more drawn to female characters and more able to write female characters. So Shopping and Fucking is 4 men and 1 young woman, and then for the revival, I thought that's the thing that really dates the play. You know, everybody's said, "Oh, well, you know, the themes are so relevant and blah blah blah," and I think that's right. But I thought, well, actually, the gender balance really places that in a different time and space. So for the revival, Ashley Maguire played Brian. As a sort of non-binary sort of figure. I said I would change it. If she wants to be a Bryony, she could be a Bryony, but she said she thought felt more she felt more like she wanted to play it as a non-binary sort of thing. So, but that was, you know, slightly just readdressing the gender balance thing. So, but as the plays have gone on, I felt more drawn to the female characters, and so now actually, quite a lot of my plays actually have more female characters than male characters. So I would say that's probably the most substantial shift in my writing, is a sort of regendering of the voice of the plays.
Great. Well, look, brilliant. That was so interesting.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your
Thank
time.
you.
I wish
All
you
right. Have a.
all of the writing that you're doing,
Thank you very much.
and I look forward to seeing you when this is over.
Yeah. Take care.
Cheers.
Right. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.